Hey guys, my name's John Farmer. I'm a photographer based in Dallas, Texas, and today I want to show you my editing process for cosplay photography. Alright, so I begin by using the pen tool and cutting out the subject. When I am done selecting with the pen tool, I will right click, make selection, and feather radius of 0.5 pixels, and then I'll press a mask on the lower right side to cut out the selection. And I will Control or Command J to duplicate it. Double click the mask to go into selected mask. Then I will click this brush with the edges coming off of it, and just kind of go around the edges here to make it bring out the edges that I wasn't able to cut out individually with the pen tool. Then I'll go back around with the pen tool to make sure all of the selection was cut out. And I'll do the same thing with the edges on this selection as well. So my process with edits like this is I'll go through a bunch of different backgrounds and just kind of color grade for the background. Then if I change it, I'll go back and fix the color grade. Alright, so every time I color grade, I go to the bottom right to adjustment layers, and I'll select color balance adjustment layer, and I'll clip it to the layer below with the box with the arrow pointing down on the properties tab of the adjustment layer. Alright, so I wanted to kind of do some skin retouching before I went any further, because it would get more complicated the more I go along. So I like to do skin retouching initially, at least a little bit. So what I'll do is I'll make a new layer, and I will select healing brush tool, and I will go through and get rid of any blemishes or any strands of hair that are kind of on the face that I don't want in the image. Alright, so I'm going to merge that with Control or Command and Alt Option plus E. And below that I will select everything and put it into a group with Control or Command G. So now I want to kind of make the hairs better by brushing in extra hair behind the subject, and I will do that with a brush that I made in Photoshop with one of my own pictures. So I just brush in these hairs by selecting the color on the outside of the hairs and just doing that a couple times with a few different layers in order to make the ears look like it's not a cutout. Alright, and I will also merge that with Control Command Alt Option plus E and group everything below into another group with Control Command G. And now I have the subject where I want it for now, and I can go ahead and color grade everything that I've done so far with the new merge layer. Alright, so I'm going to make some highlights on the edges of the subject for a rim light effect. And the way I'm going to do it is I will make a curves adjustment layer and clip it to the subject. Then I will go into the reds. I will brighten the reds and go into the blues, darken the blues to make yellow, because the opposite of blue is yellow. And then I'll brighten that in the RGB tab. And then I'll just paint it, I'll press Control or Command I to invert the curves adjustment layer, and then I will paint in the effect where I want it with a white brush. Alright, so I'm just going to play around with a few effects. I never really know exactly what I want to do, but I kind of look at a reference photo. I look at the video game characters, or if it's an anime, I'll look at the anime, or, you know, whatever it is. So I ended up going with this one. I thought it was pretty cool looking, and it wasn't too overwhelming for the image. So I put it in there, and I played around with the levels by just pressing Control or Command L. And for this specific character, it's a League of Legends character, Xayah. And I noticed that there's some blue sparks coming off her. So I just put in these because it was pretty close to what I saw on the video game. So I wanted to make her cape kind of look like it's flowing in the wind. So I selected this small part of her shoulder armor, and I increased the size so it looked like a cape, and I just kind of fit it in there. I made a mask with a mask tab on the bottom right, and painted away with a black brush on the mask to paint away some of the pixels in order to kind of fit it to the scene. So here I go to Puppet Warp, and I'll rasterize the layer, go Edit, Puppet Warp, and it will make these this mesh looking thing, and that way I can put pins on there and manipulate the cape how I think it would look. Alright, so with the cape kind of moving in the wind, it's going to have a little bit of motion blur. So I go ahead and apply a layer mask and convert to Smart Object. Then I'll go to Filter, Blur, Motion Blur, and I'll play around with the angle and the distance to make it look like it's kind of flowing in a natural kind of way. So you kind of have to play with the angle a little bit depending on what you're doing it with. Alright, so I didn't want the motion blur in every part of the cape, so I went down to the smart filters, and that only pops up if you have it in a smart object. So on the smart filter, I inverted it by pressing Control or Command I, and then painted with a white brush where I wanted the effect. Alright, so I want to create a shadow because it was looking fake, because right where her hand was, there was a very bright area on the cape, and realistically with the light source coming in from the left side, there would be a shadow. So what I'm going to do is I will make a new layer, I'll clip it to the cape, and I will put it into multiply blending mode, and I will paint in a shadow. Alright, so I wanted to get some a little bit of orange glow on the cape because I had put some orange glow on the subject, so realistically the cape would have some as well. So what I did was the same thing. I put a curves adjustment layer in there, and I clipped it all the way down to the cape layer, and I went into the reds, increased it a little bit. I went into the blues, decreased it for yellow, because the opposite of blue is yellow. Then I went to RGB tab and increased that to make it brighter. Alright, so I really wanted to get these daggers kind of flying around the image, because the character on League has these daggers that kind of fly through the air, and it's really cool looking. So I wanted to kind of do something like that. So in order to do that, I got the pen tool. I selected out the dagger with the pen tool, and I pressed Control or Command C to copy it after it's selected, and then Control and Command V to paste it into the image. So that will allow me to have just that dagger So it's important to convert the cutout to a smart object, because if you don't and you kind of expand it and kind of warp it, it will warp the pixels. But if it's in a smart object, the pixels will stay intact and it will be much higher quality. So it's important to put these things into a smart object if you cut something out that's really, really small. So I just do that, and then I'll Control or Command J to copy it and kind of mess around with the way I want it to be flying. So with these, there's definitely going to be motion blur in the daggers. So I will go select blur, motion blur, and play with the angle and the distance on each one. And they're going to be a little bit different because they're in different positions. Alright, so with the video game character, when she throws a dagger, there's this stream of pink light that goes behind it. So I wanted to create something that was kind of like that. So I ended up seeing this effect on a black background, and so I just put it in screen blending mode. It wasn't really perfect because it wasn't the right color and the right shape. So I added a hue and saturation adjustment layer and clipped it to that layer by pressing the little box in the properties tab. I just kind of played around with the color a little bit until I found the right hue that I wanted. Then I masked out the area that I did not want because it was kind of spinning up and I didn't want that part. So I added another hue and saturation adjustment layer and I colorized it because it's a little darker in the beginning of the stream, and then it fades into a lighter pink, and I just kind of blended those together. Then what I did was I just copied all that and I put it on the other daggers as well. So here I wanted to change the background. So I put in this new background and I had to go back and color grade the subject again because the subject was not color graded correctly for the scene. So and that happens a lot of times with me personally, because I like to play around with a bunch of different backgrounds and kind of set the scene and then go back and play with more backgrounds and other aspects of the image just to kind of see what it looks like. So sometimes I have to go back and recolor grade. Alright, so I noticed that there was a lot of really candy colored blue in the image, and I really wanted it to be kind of dark and more desaturated than that. So I went into hue and saturation adjustment layer on the very top and went into the blues and turned down the lightness and the saturation in order to kind of get rid of that candy look. Alright, so I wanted to kind of give an extra effect. So I put in this blue fire that's on my website if you're interested, and I put it into screen blending mode. Alright, so I noticed that the streams behind the daggers, they weren't pink enough, so I added a hue and saturation adjustment layer to each one of those individually and made it pink and turned down the opacity a little bit to kind of better match how the character actually uses the daggers. So I wanted to add some color dodge, so I made a new layer and put it into color dodge blending mode, and I just selected a pink color and I added some to the areas that I feel like would be glowing a little bit, and on the edge of the daggers especially looked really good with the glow effect on it. And I did that again for the little blue sparks. Alright, so I really like to add some motion to every image that I can. And there is a lot of motion already. I really wanted to add some dirt kind of exploding around for more of a action scene. So I put it in there, and then I'll go filter, blur, motion blur, and give it a little bit of blur to make it look like it's kind of moving in the scene. And I'll just do that a few times. Alright, so I was not happy with the background again. So I put in this picture that I took in my neighborhood, and because I really like the sky. It was a little more interesting, and I wasn't a big fan of all the purple of the last one. There was too much in my opinion. So this one's a little bit different colored and more subtle. So I liked it a lot more. Alright, so I wanted to give some more glow. So I make a new layer and put it into screen blending mode, and just kind of try to get a good color. Alright, so to increase the effect, I will add a new layer and put it into color dodge. So I go to color grade the background to better match the scene with a color balance adjustment layer. Alright, so for this effect, I wanted it to kind of be make it look like it's kind of twirling around the subject, and in order to do that, I went into Filter, Blur Gallery, Path Blur, and I gave it a little bit of a curve and increased the speed. And I continue to add some more color dodge. So I'm going to give some contrast by making a curves adjustment layer and decreasing on the bottom left side. And what I'm going to do is I'll Control or Command I to invert that mask and paint in where I want the darker areas to be. Alright, so I want to also give some highlights. So the way I like to do that is I will press Alter Option and then New Layer on the bottom right, and it will pull up a new layer tab, and I will put that into Overlay Blending Mode, and then I will check the box that says Fill with Overlay Neutral Color 50% Gray and press OK, and it will give that layer 50% gray. And I will choose dodge, and I will dodge where I want some highlights. And if you want to burn, you can either just press Alt on and paint, or you can go and right click, dodge, and just select burn. So the way I do it is I'll just dodge while holding Alt. I wanted to make her jaw a little more angular, so in order to do that, I'll just go to her layer. I'll make sure that it's in Smart Layer, and then I'll go to Liquify. Alright, so I really wanted some more stuff going on in the image, so I took this cool texture and I put it into soft light blending mode, and then I put a mask on it and painted away some of the areas where I wanted it not to show up, like over the face, over the subject, where I really didn't want it kind of hiding the subject. I really wanted to make a drastic change to the color grade and the exposure and all the micro adjustments, and the best way for me to do that is through Camera Raw. So to get there, go to Camera Raw, or go to Filter and then go to Camera Raw, and I usually almost always have that layer as a smart object, so I can go back and kind of tweak the settings later on if I need to. So I'll just let you kind of watch what I do. Alright, so I want to go into Selective Color. So I'll go to Adjustment Layer, Selective Color, and I'll go into the reds. And I'm looking at the skin tones with this one. So I'll kind of make the skin tones where I feel like it's a better look, because they were a little light and airy for the darker surrounding area. So I really want that just to be on the skin, or where I want it to be. So in order for me to do that, I'll invert the mask by Control or Command I and paint with a white brush where I want it. So I kind of made an attempt to paint in some eyes. Alright, so there's some reds that I kind of wanted to desaturate. So I just added a hue and saturation adjustment layer, inverted the mask, and painted in where I wanted to desaturate. Alright, so I wanted to add some of these sparks that I took pictures of, and I put it into color dodge blending mode just to kind of make it look real cool. I like the effect it gives with the color dodge and little specks, and it was especially cool with the real fire or the real spark picture that I took with my camera. I gave it a little bit of a blur with the blur gallery, so filter, blur, gallery, and field blur. Alright guys, thanks so much for watching. If you guys are interested in Photoshop overlays, check out my website at jfarmphoto.com. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments. Please like and subscribe and hit that bell notification for my future videos. That's all I have for you guys. Have a good one.